There's very few things we come in contact with on a daily basis that can cost us our livelihood, our freedom, or even our lives. But unfortunately, firearms is one of those things. And today I'm going to cover 7 of the most common mistakes that are made by gun owners that you absolutely need to avoid. Now, I'm going to cover everything from the safety aspect of firearms all the way to keeping yourself out of legal trouble with firearms. So, there's going to be a good mixture here, but a lot of these subjects can get people riled up because they have their own way of doing it. And you may find your own way of doing it that's different than mine. But these 7 things are generally speaking going to be, things that we all as gun owners are going to want to follow or avoid. So, of course, I want to hear your opinion after the video. Whether you think I'm totally off base or you agree with me, let me know down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing and turn your notifications on. And if you want to support what I do further, you can join the SHOT team, gain access to some pretty cool perks. Let's go and get started. Now, this first one I'm going to talk about is probably one of the easiest way that you can actually screw yourself when it comes to firearms, and that's not knowing the laws in your state. Now, I specify in your state because from state to state, from neighboring state to neighboring state, all of this stuff can be wildly different. In one state, you don't need a concealed carry permit. You can have your gun loaded in your vehicle. You drive across state lines, you're on a trip, you have that same gun in that same exact spot without a permit or in a more restrictive state, and you get pulled over, you could find yourself going to jail. State lines, you're on a trip, you have that same gun in that same exact spot without a permit or in a more restrictive state, and you get pulled over, you could find yourself going to jail. Now, let's say you inherit a bunch of firearms from your great-grandfather or your grandfather, and he has a lot of cool ones, and one of them just happens to be a Thompson submachine gun from World War II. And your grandfather did not do any paperwork on it. There's no tax stamp or anything like that. That, sentimental piece and really expensive piece could cost you your freedom if you don't handle it the right way and somebody happens to find out about it. And if you say, oh, well, that will never happen to me because they're not going to know. Well, maybe you have a deranged girlfriend or boyfriend that calls the cops on you and they request to search your home. I don't know, they get a warrant, whatever, and they find your newly acquired, fully automatic, unregistered machine gun from World War II. They're not going to look at it and say, oh, yeah, it was an heirloom, I get it. No. There's a lot of things that you need to know here. Another common one, if you're moving to another state and unfortunately they're more restrictive and you have all of your Glocks and your Smith & Wessons and your ARs and your rifles and everything else, and you're like, all right, honey, we're moving, it's moving day, blah, 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 and you bring all of that stuff into, I don't know, New York or New Jersey, and, God forbid, you get pulled over. I mean, a number of different things can happen that can take your livelihood just like that. I mean, stories are all across the internet of people that were just simply traveling and they had a concealed carry on them. And in their state, it was totally fine. They go to a neighboring state and boom, they get popped. Now, just because you disagree with these laws doesn't mean that's going to be an adequate defense, and it's probably not going to work, right? Ignorance of the law is never really a great defense, and it's not something that I want to trust my freedom to or my firearms. So knowing those laws is super important, and things are always changing, so you have to keep up with it to an extent, and also consider not only in your home state but states that you frequently travel, or maybe even worse, infrequently travel through, and those states can have wildly different gun laws that can affect you and your family. So it's something that you definitely need to take a little bit of time in learning, specific to you. You don't have to learn all of them, but if you're a concealed carrier, or like I said, you have an inheritance, or you want to protect your family in case you ever had to use your firearm in self-defense, there's a lot of things that you need to know about the law itself. You don't have to be a lawyer to know this stuff, but seeking that information is a really good first step. But there actually is one question on that 4473 that is more prevalent than it's ever been, that a lot of people are probably answering incorrectly, and that's the Mary Jane question. Even if it's legal in your state, it's still illegal at a federal level. It could be totally within the law in your state, but if you are a user of any kind and you answer no to that question, technically you're lying. Now, 4473s and those denials are very rarely pursued and prosecuted, which is why I did an entire video talking about background checks. But if you have any kind of luck like mine, yours would be the one that would get pursued by the FBI. So it definitely is something that you want to consider, and you have to be really careful with that stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of people that have actual medical uses for that have to make a choice between that or, having a firearm for self-defense. And I hope that the laws in the future get changed for sure, because I personally think it's ridiculous, but that's just my opinion. You really have to be very careful with that question specifically. Now, here's two important ones that I really need to cover, and the first one is not knowing your firearm. And what I mean is, and most people know what the trigger are and what the sights are and all of that kind of stuff, but I mean really knowing this firearm. Where does this firearm print? Some guns, when you hold them out, your sight picture is pretty much always going to be the same. If we're talking about iron sights, we're going to line those sights up. We're focused on the front dot. Everything else is kind of out of focus. If we're using a red dot, which I don't have on this pistol, then we're putting that dot basically where we want our shots to go. But every gun, every pistol is going to print a little bit differently. So I could hold this one perfectly across the top, and it may print down a little bit lower. Maybe it prints up a little bit higher. Maybe I need to adjust the sights to one side or the other. Maybe this gun doesn't like the ammo that I buy. That same ammo you can run in every other gun and it runs 100% perfect, but there is a chance that this gun just won't feed it well. Now, are there ways around that? Could there be circumstances with the gun causing that issue? Absolutely. But if everything else runs fine through it, well, run something else that's going to be, comparable, and that's going to work for you. Maybe you find that when you draw out of a holster at the range that, man, your sights are never on target. There's too much adjustment that you have to do. Maybe you just don't see these sights well. Maybe those need to be swapped. Maybe you get 4 or 5 mags into that gun and all of a sudden it starts having issues, and this is something you would have never known about if you didn't take it to the range. So I think one of the most responsible things that you can do as a gun owner is, as soon as you buy that gun, if it is a gun for defensive purposes, you should take that gun to the range and run at least 100 rounds, if not 200 rounds. You got to invest a little bit of money into that firearm just to make sure that everything is ironed out, everything is working properly. There are some companies that talk about a break-in period, and you just need to make sure that the gun is working as intended and that you are efficient with that gun, because there's really it would really be a silly thing to buy a new gun, get the ammo, get the holster, go through all of this stuff, and then realize that, man, the gun has a broken firing pin or something crazy happened straight from the factory that could have been resolved if you had just taken it to the range. But let's say now you actually need that gun and it will not fire and you're in a bad situation. So I know that seems a little bit long-winded and kind of preachy, and I don't like to be like that, but it is one of the single most important things as a new or experienced gun owner. We all have to do this with any kind of defensive firearm. Now, if it's a gun that you just, World War II rifle or, something like that, then you don't have to take it out that day or shoot 200 rounds through it, But if it's one that you could potentially use to save your life, you really want to make sure that you iron all of that stuff out and make sure that you are the best shooter you can possibly be with that specific gun. And that leads me to the other part of this equation, which is muscle memory. So releasing the magazine. Always doing that first, and then always checking the chamber behind you. So it is going to be the very first thing, no matter if somebody randomly hands you a gun, it's your self-defense gun, it's a brand new gun you bought, whatever the case may be, the first thing you do is you always drop that mag and you always check the chamber. This one specifically is a double to single action. So if you're going to carry a gun like this, knowing where that double action is and understanding that first pull is going to be really long. If it has a safety, maybe you're somebody that, you want to put it in single action and you want to turn the safety on. So getting that muscle memory ingrained and making sure that that safety is swept off each and every time. The way you unholster the gun, is that going to be the same each and every time? Do you have, it kind of built into you to pull the garments out of the way? Maybe summertime is obviously going to be different than wintertime. So in winter, you have a lot more garments on and a lot more things to consider. Maybe you kind of change the way you carry from season to season. Well, that's another thing that you have to consider. If you do I'm just using this as an example, but maybe you do shoulder holster in the winter because you have, extra layers on. Well, you need to make sure that you've practiced that motion as well. Maybe you do appendix in the summer, so you need to practice that 3, 4, 5 o'clock position, whatever. You have to practice all of those positions and make sure that you're able to get that clothing out of the way. Defensive situations happen very quickly. I'd say 99.9% of the time it's going to happen, and you have all this stuff you're trying to process, and the last thing you want is your shirt getting in the way of you potentially saving your life or others around you. This works for your magazines as well if you're going to carry a spare mag. So practicing those magazine changes, and if you have issues at the range, understanding what you're going to do each and every time. Now, I have a really bad habit about this because when I'm shooting guns at the range, I will, if I have an issue, I'll kind of look at the gun before I do what I'm supposed to do in order to clear that malfunction. I'll kind of look at it because I'm trying to report back to y'all, but that's really no excuse. I need to make sure that I get in the habit of doing that at the range when I have an issue, and then go back, try to take a look at the footage and see what actually happened with the gun. Because again, what you do at the range is going to translate and be exacerbated in a, really stressful situation. When it's in your control, you should take that time to make sure that everything is perfect, everything is lined up, and make sure that each and every time you do something, even as simple as what I just did, dropping the slide, making sure that you're racking it the same way. Each and every time you're pulling the gun up, you're making sure that you can get on target quickly, taking the shot. All of these things play into that muscle memory, and it's super important, man, because again, if these things happen very quickly, they happen unexpectedly, and if you're going to go through all of this and have a defensive tool on you, you want to be prepared to use that tool and be effective with it. Now, here's one that I think is often overlooked by a lot of gun owners, and I think it's a mistake if you don't do it, and that is joining a good gun rights activist organization. So, in our daily lives, most of us aren't thinking about guns all day, every day, or whatever. We're just kind of going on about our day. We buy them, we have them, we like them, we use them, right? We take them to the range on the weekends and whatever. But behind the scenes, there are organizations that actually are fighting to make sure that things in your specific state aren't getting just slipped under the rug without you even knowing. It's like you trying to keep up with every new piece of legislation in your specific state or across the country. To me, it just seems like a lot. And I could keep up with it a lot like that. And I try to keep up with what I can that's firearm specific. But at the same time, there's things that just try to get passed through every single day, and that's what it seems like anyways. It always seems like there's some new piece of gun legislation that's getting tied to some other bill for Yeah, it's so ridiculous, man. So you need to support companies that are supporting you, around the clock. Now, I'm not tied to any one company, but I know there's some ones that I just don't support that I think do more harm to the Second Amendment and the defense of that than good, or have in the past. And I think there's some that do a fantastic job and are unwavering in their support for the Second. And just this past year, I think I joined two of those actually. And sometimes, it's best. I know the big national organizations are, they can be really great. Some of them are really great, but the ones in your state might be even more important to join up. Obviously they don't have as many members, not as much funding, but they too are protecting the rights in your state. You may say, why do I have to pay for something like that? Shouldn't it just be something that's automatically defended? I don't know that too many people would actually think like that, but if you're a new gun owner, I can see, somebody saying that to themselves, like, man, we have it and that's it. But that's honestly not the case. You can you can Google any new piece of gun legislation right now, and there's something popping up somewhere, whether it's on a federal level or on a state level. There is always stuff that is trying to get pushed through, whether it's magazines, whether it's the gun themselves, whether it's just a political tool that some politician's trying to use to get votes, whatever. This stuff is always happening. So you really have to be mindful of that. And if you don't want to keep up with this stuff all the time, join one of those organizations. Not only do they do good work for us, but they also make it super easy. If there's like a bill that's being pushed through the House or the Senate in your state, they will a lot of times, write up emails and have your representatives with the boxes already checked, and you just sign your name, boom, send it off, and you've done your part. And a lot of times those organizations will tell you, who's voting against your interest, so you can maybe make a better decision next time that voting comes around. So they do have a lot of benefit, and again, it's about picking the right one that's right for you. Do a little bit of research, and you will find ones not only on a national level, but on a state level that you'd be willing to support, and it's so freaking cheap. I mean, if you just want to do a yearly membership, it is really, really cheap to do that. Now, here's one that absolutely drives me nuts, and it's not exclusive to the gun community at all. It happens in a lot of communities, but man, it can be very prevalent in the gun community, and that is just simply knowing everything and not willing to take any new advice. It's like the cool kids of the gun club. I do not subscribe to that way of thinking, and it doesn't apply to just people my age or younger. It doesn't apply to just old people. I mean, there's a lot of older people that are right here on YouTube that have changed, the way they shoot, the guns they use, their defensive tactics, because they understand that things have gotten better. There's counterparts to those guys that still shoot, they only carry a revolver, and they shoot the same way since they've, been doing it since the 50s. There's arrogance with some people that, just know a ton about firearms, but they don't like to spread that knowledge. To me, somebody with a lot of knowledge that doesn't want to share that with other people is almost useless, to be quite honest with you. When you learn something like this, whether it's a skill, if you're a trainer, whether you're a gunsmith, whether you just know a lot about a lot of different types of guns and the histories attached to them, and what each one does and the action and all of that kind of stuff, I almost think that you have a responsibility to share that stuff with other people that are interested. I'm not saying to going around to random grocery stores and telling people about, gun stuff that could care less, but I am saying, like, if somebody approaches you and you say, I used to do this all the time, especially when I worked around a lot of people, and some people, from previous jobs still call me, hey man, I got a question about this. And if I don't know, I'll tell them, hey, I don't know. But I'm always willing to learn, and I'm always willing to pass on as much info as I possibly can. And I don't think there's a single person that I've ever come across that you can say that I haven't tried to give you good information or give you the information or even my opinion when it comes to firearms. You know, and to me, there's no exclusive club. It's just like if you know a lot, well, then you can share a lot. You know, for the longest time, people came up to me for concealed carry stuff and tips and holsters and belts and, hey, you know, what do you think about this or what do you think about that? And I always try to give my opinion and just tell them, hey, this is my opinion, but this is what I think. Or if I know something, I'll tell them that too. You know, and a lot of this, I believe, comes down to people's experience at gun shops because there is quite a bit more arrogance, I think, in a lot of those places than in the real world, if you will. Now that does not go for every gun shop by any means, and there's some really awesome ones out there. But there's some other ones when you walk in, you just don't feel like, yeah, it's, I guess it's like that with anything, man. I'm thinking about my dealer experience in the motorcycle world, you know, and that's something I've talked about. It really is, man. It really depends on where you go and who's there, who's working there, and that's a big part of it, man. But I guess my biggest thing is I don't want to be a part of that problem. I want to share what I know with people and also not get super offended if I don't know something, you know? I have a responsibility to have knowledge about the things that I pass on, which is in big part why y'all have seen probably, yeah, since the beginning of the year, a lot more research goes into my videos now. You know, I want to make sure that I'm giving you cool tidbits of information on a gun or where a gun came from or the origins. And it doesn't have to be an entire history lesson, but I like to throw that stuff in there so you have some extra knowledge. And that gives me extra knowledge when I'm researching these things. So I think, yeah, I kind of take that personal and try to make sure I give the best knowledge that I possibly can, which is why you've seen a change in my channel and making sure that things are better researched and more interesting topics are covered here as well. And you guys have seemed to really like that. So there you go. Not to toot my own horn, but I do take that stuff personal. And I think that when it comes to firearms, man, arrogance can be left at home because at the end of the day, that's where we all want to get to. And I think, you know, we all want to learn these tools. We know what they're for, and we have a responsibility to be responsible with them and to have a good amount of knowledge or learn as much as we can about them. That leads me so perfectly into the last one I want to talk about. The guys that feel like they can just go into a gun shop and buy this specific gun for their significant other. Remember when I was just talking about gun shops? You know, there are some that I avoid like the plague, but there's also a lot of really good ones. And when you come across a good one, you typically go back there, you know, especially if they're local to you. Well, those guys have a lot of experience. And if I walk in as a new gun owner and I haven't taken it upon myself to do any kind of research and I'm, you know, trying to get a gun for my spouse, is she going to think any less of me because I asked the guy behind the counter, hey, what do you think a good recommendation is for brand new female shooter, blah, blah, blah. Boom, there you go. They can tell you, hey, you know, you want to stay away from this. And again, assuming that they have knowledge, that, you know, good knowledge, then they're going to tell you, okay, yeah, smaller firearms, a lot harder to shoot. If it's a little bit bigger, has a little bit more size on it, it's going to be easier to shoot. If this is your first time gun, you may want to start with this caliber, but also, hey, what are you doing with the gun? Are you planning on concealed carrying it? Is it something that you're going to use as a training tool? Is it going to be a home defense gun? Is it something that both of y'all kind of need to know how to shoot if it's going to stay inside the home? If it's going to carry, okay, we need to consider size there, of course, but we also need to consider that size plays a big part in how that gun is going to shoot and how it's going to handle recoil. We don't want to scare you away from firearms, so you may have to, you know, maybe bring a little bit bigger gun because that's going to typically have a little bit less recoil. There's a lot of things there to consider, but you know, when guys go in and they buy the smallest gun, or even, you know, girls, hey, Mrs. Heckshot even still does that to this day. Hey, she sees this gun and it's chameleon colored or whatever. I think the P365, the 380 version is like that because it has the manual safety on it. And she still wants that gun. And I'm like, you carry a regular P365, the 9mm without the safety, it's actually a better gun. Yeah, I know, but I like the color. Okay. You know, I get that. You know, the Rose from SIG is another one that I've covered, you know, when I was talking about pretty firearms and that whole thing. So, you know, there is some of that. And if that makes them feel good and that gets them into it, if that's what it takes, that's fine. You just want to make sure that you pick out one that is going to be suitable for their needs, one they can learn on, assuming that they're new. And sometimes you got to humble yourself and just take a little bit of advice if you don't know what you're talking about. Because again, the last thing you want to do is scare your significant other away from this, because it can be super important. It is the great equalizer between men and women. So it is something super important. So the last thing you want to do is let your pride get in the way and your spouse ends up having a bad day because you chose the wrong firearm. Sometimes it happens, and you know, you can sell it and buy something else, but taking a little bit of advice and humbling yourself is typically going to be the best route. And get some information in before you go. Don't just go in there and expecting everybody to have everything for you too. Maybe you don't have access to a great gun shop with a lot of knowledgeable people. Hell, you don't know what's going to be knowledgeable if you don't gain some knowledge going into that. You know, it is a big purchase and it should be treated as such. Just like if you're going to buy a vehicle, treat it like that. Get some research, you know, check out some videos, whatever. And I think that is the best approach when it comes to choosing a firearm or letting your spouse choose a firearm for themselves. So there you go. There's 7 common mistakes that gun owners need to avoid. I'd love to hear your opinion on this, or maybe even leave your own list. If you disagree or agree, let me know down below. And again, if you like what I do, consider subscribing and make sure you turn on your notifications so you never miss one of the videos from me. And if you really like what I do, you want to gain early access and a lot of other cool perks, consider joining the SHOT Team. Super cheap to do that. You can do it on Patreon or right here on YouTube. Big thanks to you guys. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.